Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode where we'll discuss the convoluted world of AI and machine learning integration within the pharma industry. AI and machine learning are indeed transforming the pharma industry by enabling faster, more accurate, and more accessible drug discovery development, clinical trials, and many other processes such as marketing as well. These technologies can analyze large-scale data, biomedical data, to identify existing drugs with therapeutic potential for various diseases. Major application of AI in pharma include drug design, molecular drug discovery, gene mutation-related diseases, drug development, clinical trials, disease treatment, drug target development, and many other applications. The use of AI in pharma is projected to reach market volume of $10 billion by 2024. Additionally, AI in the pharma industry offers benefits such as accelerated drug discovery, more efficient clinical trials, quicker regulatory approvals, and targeted campaigns for marketing through materials generated in-house. Gen AI is transforming various aspects of the industry by revamping operations and potentially unlocking billions of dollars in value. Pharma companies are leveraging AI to optimize processes like manufacturing, supply chain management, drug formulation, delivery optimization, and also personalized medicine. Yet, with the widespread implementation of these advanced digital tools, that poses significant organizational challenges. The need for robust data infrastructure, adherence to stringent regulatory compliance, and cultivation of a workforce that is digitally literate is more than ever crucial. As technologies moves forward at an unprecedented pace, we anticipate the challenging task of large-scale adoption and its multidimensional impact on the pharma landscape. In today's episode, we are happy to engage with an industry expert to dissect the current trends and explore the potential of AI-powered innovation and address the structural and strategic adjustment required to capitalize on this technological frontier. We are very happy to have with us today my dear friend and colleague, Paul Agapow, Director at GSK, using AI and machine learning to accelerate drug development and clinical operations. Paul brings a wealth of experience in data management, bioinformatics, and data integration within the life science industry. Paul worked in many prestigious institutions such as Imperial College of London as a group leader in translational bioinformatics. He also worked as a director of AI and machine learning in AstraZeneca and now at GSK. Believe it or not, Paul was originally an immunologist for over 20 years. He's been navigating the intersection of informatics and biomedicine, leading teams in academia and industry, writing codes, doing analysis, building platforms, and most of all, trying to understand how disease work and how to treat it. Welcome to the episode, Paul. Thank you for being with us today.
Very pleased to be here, Rad.
Thank you. So, Paul, for people who don't know you, I know that we have a lot of connections together, but for people to get to know you better, can you tell us about your day-to-day job and what does it look like and what you're doing on a daily basis?
Okay, so I'm one of those people who's had many job titles, but essentially I do dry things to wet things. I use mathematics, statistics, AI, and so on and so forth on complex biology, particularly in the context recently in for drug development for pharmaceutical companies. So I'm currently employed at a big pharmaceutical company, although it'll probably be a different big pharmaceutical company by the time this goes to air, to help them in optimizing their drug development and their clinical trials, seeing any way we can take the data, the processes that is involved there, and use that to help us make better decisions.
Fantastic. That's very exciting. And it's very interesting. So Paul, on that note, I know a lot of people are talking about AI, machine learning in pharma and drug development. Can we have a quick overview, like maybe high level, but at the same time more practical narrative on that side, because everything that we hear in the media about the impact of AI and machine learning is really a description from a marketing perspective. But now we want to have an insider look from a practical perspective, and from expert like yourself. So what does it mean exactly, application of AI and machine learning in drug development and clinical operations?
Okay, so let's kind of take a step back first and think about what drug development is, because this is often very much a surprise to people the way that it actually works. Drug development, as it currently exists, is basically a series of very large hedged bets. You can see a lot of these diagrams across the web and in books and things forth as to this great attrition in drug
Mm,
development. You will start out with, tends to be that, thousands of possible drugs, and by the time you've winnowed through those and found out which ones are suitable, unsuitable for taking forward, before you finally get to a clinical trial, you'd be down to hundreds at that point. And by the
mhm.
time you've stepped through a series of clinical trials, you might typically end up with one that you can actually sell. And
Yeah.
even
So in
amongst those that actually
and
make it to market, that are
yeah,
approved for
sorry.
safety and for so forth, you'll find that generally only about 30% of them actually make any money. So, and you know, let's not get peculiar about mentioning money here. Drug development does have to be a sustainable process. Okay, it has to pay for itself, and so a drug company essentially is making a series of very expensive bets to see if it can get any of these drugs to pay off. Most of the things it tries will
Mhm,
fail, and it take you around about $2 billion or $2 billion and 10 years to get from that drug candidate to that result there.
yeah.
So that sets the stage for what sort of industry we're in. We're essentially, as I said, making this series of bets. So if you can do anything to make those bets better, to de-risk them even by a few percent, that's going to be a huge win in there. Now, the second half of this question would be that if we look at the pharmaceutical industry, in a sense, it's almost the platonic data driven industry. In a sense, it produces data, it,
Yeah.
it generates drug candidates, it tests them, it puts them into people, and then it outputs data. How do those drugs behave? Are they safe? What do they do on people, and so forth? So, therefore, there's this match between those two halves there. It says we're making a set of bets, and we're in a data rich environment, a data
Mhm,
centric industry. Okay,
mhm.
so why can't we optimize them? And this, of course, is when AI comes in. Now, AI having been so amazingly successful everywhere, there are all these people, of course, that instantly coupled the two together. Can we use AI to promote the use or de risk drug development in
Yeah.
there? And so there are some very obvious ones using AI to essentially generate new candidate molecules in there. Okay, so there's new things that could be drugs, but there's a whole set of other uses beyond that as well. You could use AI to study disease biology, to study patients, and to understand better what's going on with them, understand
Mhm,
even what types of patients we have, because many patients will have a particular disease, but if you look within them, there will be subtypes of that disease or different causes for that disease. And there are ways to optimize the business processes in ways that are as prosaic as, can we optimize the supply of drugs, for example, making sure that we manufacture enough? Can we use it to predict the budgeting and money that we're going to spend?
mhm.
So forth. So there are just a myriad of possibilities in there.
Right. That's. I mean, I think you mentioned something that is very important. Um, so there's a lot of small operations and within this life cycle. But then AI, if you think about it, in machine learning and statistic, it's been, I mean, being used for a long time. There, it's not something that is new. So is there any hype between like the latest advances in in technology and AI and what we see right now and on the market on that space? Is there like something new in that in the drug development industry, or is this something just in a different narrative of something that existed before and that we're trying just to overemphasize the impact of it on the industry right now?
I think for many years, I think the drug development industry was almost a bit old fashioned about it,
Mm.
but it got the gospel of data, certainly in the 21st century here, and has been following that quite hard. Conversely, there is this tendency within the industry to go for the disruptor du jour, is what it's been.
Yeah.
What is the
Yeah.
latest solution that's going to ease all our woes? And that's fairly natural, of course. It's a complex industry. People are always looking for solutions. There's a lot of money involved and so forth. So I think there are certainly promises that they will revolutionize drug development. You'll often see these phrases slashing drug development
True.
time or
Yeah.
accelerating drug development. But what in practice I think we're seeing, and will probably be the case, is we'll see a slow evolutionary movement in there. Things will get better and better by increments, but we're not going to radically change the industry overnight. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm not optimistic,
Yeah.
but I think the grounds are definitely there for us making improvements, just not necessarily incredible improvements. John Overington, I think, once quipped that people will often promise about slashing the time it takes to develop a drug, but when you look at what they've delivered, he'll say it often comes down to you've slashed a few months of the process,
Yeah.
which is still an advance, but
Still
it's
a bit
not the
advanced.
same.
Right. See, that's interesting. So I know for a fact, because I've been in the pharma space for a while, and I've seen people thinking about the investment that they have to do in AI, and so there is that approach of I am careful about what I'm gonna be trying to invest in. So they are not gonna deploy, big projects involving AI at large scale from the get go. So the approach is very careful about I'm gonna start with a small scale project. I'm gonna see how impact it has, and then I'm gonna try to take it, scale it up a little bit, and then
Mm.
embed that within the entire process. So I guess my question is, what is it that changed in the last few years from investment perspective in AI, pharma companies? How do they consider that right now? So is it like, okay, it is here to stay, I'm just gonna go full speed on AI projects, or is that aspect of cautious sort of investment is still there? And how does it look on the ground?
Okay. So I think we don't want to dismiss the role of hype and FOMO. There is certainly a lot of that out there,
Mhm.
certainly a lot of exaggerated promises and over promising
Mhm.
in there. With these ideas, I've been asked about, how soon is it going to be before a drug is completely developed, without human intervention?
Mm.
And my answer to that is, well, I can't foresee that happening anytime soon. Okay. But I think we have seen lots of. There's a two direction thing coming there. There's the leadership deciding that we need to make a strategic turn towards AI and using these things from quite sound grounds.
Mm.
Believing that's the way to go, and also people from the bottom up just using it more in their everyday work. And I think they're the wide availability of high quality code, high quality libraries, and things like that has allowed a lot of the rank and file to just start using it in a very sort of democratizing effect, if
Yeah.
you are. You know,
Yeah.
flip back to the leadership side on there, we have had a lot of very interesting proofs of concept, I'll say. If you open up any scientific journal, so forth, you will almost on a weekly basis see something about how a research team has trained an AI to diagnose cancer from a series of X-rays,
Mm.
right, MRI images, and so forth. And there is great trouble as yet translating that promise into
Mm.
an actual clinically actionable tool, commodity, and so
Mm.
forth. It's still very intriguing,
Mm.
very interesting.
Um, I'm gonna take a side on that leadership point that you mentioned, and this is very important because I've seen you and me. We worked both in academia and in industry, and we went through different styles of leadership. So in pharma industry is completely different. I think the way they try to make new technology adopted within the organization, so they have their own way of doing it, and it's
Mm.
mainly driven, it's business driven more than anything else. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. In academia it's completely different. So I've seen a lot of either academia or non for profit. The I would describe the leadership style to be more. There's less authority in the way to adopt new technology. So um, I guess my question would be, what makes a good leadership in the space of pharma, and how does it look like? Is it like a top down? Is it more permissive? Is there any sort of delegation towards decision making, or is that just here's what the field, where the field is right now, and this is what we have, and this is where we're going, and all of us we're going to move in the same direction? So is it like driven by leadership, or is it like a democratic process, I would say?
I think there's not one clear picture in
Mm.
there, and that's because it's a very complex scenario that we have there. As I've said, pharmaceutical development is very much the series of hedge bets, and you don't play in that space unless you are a rich patient and have a very healthy appetite for risk.
Mm.
So, constant changing thought about what the different ways are to go about things. I think absolutely you cannot hope to develop a solid AI capability without strong leadership in that space,
Mm.
because very often a large part of pharma is quite conservative
Mm.
in its process, for good reasons. Um, if you look at a drug team or a clinical team or someone's working on regulations and so on and so forth, their job is not to be innovative. Their job is not to look at new technology and so forth. Their job is to shepherd the progression of a new asset,
Yeah.
to trial that asset and see if it works. Their job is to make sure that all the sort of T's are crossed and the I's dotted and all the correct documentation is filed and so forth.
Mm.
So without a very strong and strategic leadership in there, a top-down effort saying, we are going to move in this direction, nothing is going to happen.
Mm.
Now, having said that, if the entire enterprise is being run like that, you're never going to be able to innovate properly.
Right.
So there's a good question how to innovation can occur. And I think that therefore one has to allow a certain amount of democratic exploration, flexibility within a company
Mm.
to allow for those serendipitous advances, if you will.
Mm.
But it is a very difficult thing when you're talking about enterprises that are as large as big pharma companies.
Mm.
And as a consequence, a lot of people will say that much of the innovation that's coming in is coming in from smaller companies.
Mm.
Uh, and you'll see that those smaller companies will tend to do more innovative, to do riskier things. They will also tend to fail and collapse more. But
Mm.
their efforts will be acquired and disseminated across the industry. So it's a difficult model for
Interesting.
leadership innovation there.
That is really interesting point. Yeah. So leadership is important. The style of leadership is important. I guess there is also a shift in the leaders today from background perspective. They tend to be, or they have to be more aware of all the new technologies that are popping up. So like maybe a couple of years ago, leaders in that space would probably not be aware of what LLM is or what Gen AI is. So but and
Yeah.
all these kind of things, it's like there's a the catch up sort of race happening between what's going on the market, and then whether or not it's production ready, and then whether or not we should apply it. So I guess if I place myself in a leader position, I would say, okay, what's going on? So I need to be aware of all the trends and all the things. So how important um, education is, or data literacy is on that level of leadership, so to know or to see the value of a specific technology. You mentioned like small companies, they take risk, and big companies, they tend to be more careful about all the new technology adoptions. So is data literacy on the leadership level crucial in that space for them to be aware of, okay, here's what's going on, and then there is a vision of the impact of these technologies on what we're doing today, so we're going to take more risk on that space. I guess if we don't know exactly what we are talking about, then we're not going to go there, and there will be no innovation at all, right?
Absolutely, yes. I think data literacy is important. Like no one at that level can really hope to be, an expert in the real expert sense of all these
Mm,
new and emerging technologies. There's simply just too many of them, and they move too fast. And just staying up to date with them is,
mm,
a career in itself. But they have to have a certain basal level of
mm,
understanding of the background. And you'll see that some of these big companies do have large data literacy efforts going on in there,
mm, mm.
uh, just helping people understand the language and the culture and so forth.
Right.
And I think being able to communicate and appreciate across those cultural boundaries is
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, culture is extremely important within big organizations. So okay, so in an ideal scenario, okay, now we are, let's assume we are ready for either small scale project adoption, or a larger scale program for involving AI heavily. Now, so if we move down the hierarchy a little bit, and we try to see implementation and adoption of AI on a more of an organizational level. So I guess these programs and projects, they involve a lot of people, a lot of backgrounds, and people coming from different business departments. Um, what would be the the things that can block adoption of AI, machine learning? Let's call them new technologies, because we use a lot of AI in machine learning. So what would be the roadblocks for large scale adoption for new technologies within big organizations?
I'm going to come back to culture again,
Yeah.
and I think there's a slightly subtler variation on that. That in many ways the technology is almost unimportant.
Mm,
It's making sure that you're solving the right problems in there.
mm,
I have an example from sort of way back in my career, many, many years ago, where I was working with a group of epidemiologists who they were experts in disease, and they used to study mosquitoes that they caught.
mm,
And
mm,
they'd have a look at the mosquitoes' wings, and they compare that to a large atlas catalog that had of different mosquito wings, and they were able to therefore identify the mosquito. And I was coming up with some grand project to, we'll digitally capture these wings and we'll uh, store them somewhere. And then when a new wing comes in, we'll be able to search it against the database and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
Uh, until it was broken to me that actually they enjoyed matching wings against their book, and in any case, it didn't take very long, so forth. And and that was a classic mismatch between the technology and the
Mm.
people who had a problem to solve in there. So
Mm.
you have to first identify the problem that what is it that you're solving there, and then decide how you're going to solve it. And that calls for a lot of people who are very good at working horizontally and cross functionally.
Right.
So I find very often that it's not the rock stars in a particular area who
Mm.
are the people who really add value to those projects and help them work. They're the people who have, they know other things.
Mm.
They that when we build systems and platforms and so forth, we build them to solve problems. And they're good at understanding those problems and going out there and interpreting what's going on, interpreting the needs, and then being able to create a solution and feed them back. Now, to slightly contradict myself at that point, also creating good software is difficult, and I think
Mm.
we belittle it a little bit because once again, software creation has become very democratized, and you can go onto GitHub and download all these things, and there's all these toolkits and libraries and everything out there. But if you're actually going to produce a scalable production quality system, you need proper software engineers in there.
Yeah.
You need people need who can produce solid code, and then you
Mm.
have to an ongoing plan to maintain and fix that and scale that if need be. So
Mm.
there's definitely there's two extreme halves of this problem: people who can work across and people who are the deep experts in making good
Mm.
software.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting. So on that software note, so I know that pharma industry, um, there there were a lot of outsourcing for many of the operations within the industry. Um, are we still in the outsourcing? I know from by the time I was working for a pharma company, so the debate between outsourcing versus developing in-house, and acquiring more talents and highly skilled teams around platforms, not just software development. Um, are we still in that space of outsourcing? Is that a model that is not working anymore in the modern pharma industry, or is there a competition happening right now towards acquiring um, more and more highly skilled individuals to work in that from that technical perspective?
I think that's a very cyclical thing going on in
Mm.
there. Certainly, I think a lot of the pharma companies have decided that it's very critical to get the best talent. And whereas once upon a time, pharma headquarters and facilities used to be in almost comically out of the way places, set outside distances outside major cities on large campuses where you could have a lot of space. It was very secure and so forth, but was inconvenient to get to.
Mm.
Now,
Mm.
currently, a lot of them are moving in to the city, or close to academic centers where they can capture those people in there.
Mhm.
But there are still these occasional outsourcing efforts going on where they're hiring large bunches of people in India and so forth, or looking towards Eastern Europe, for example. And I imagine that's just going to continue in there. There's always
Mm.
going to be that process of attempted optimization, if you were, as
Mm.
to how can we get the best talent, but also how can we spend the least amount of money, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. So on teams, I would say skills. So, do you see any shift that is happening right now in terms of team composition? So, before tech and AI boom, so there were a lot of you can see a typical or like a large scale organization, a typical organization of the team. So you see a lot of product owners, project managers, business analysts, a few developers, and so on. So it's more like business. It's more balanced business, sort of technical. With the advance of technologies these days, do you see any shift happening in the way these teams are being formed? Are we more technical, or um, do these technologies, platforms, and tool being adopted from outside vendors and being adopted within companies, or do you see any sort of dynamic happening in the do we see less business analysts, less project managers and product owners?
Interesting question. I think there is always that tendency to try and commoditize something or manage something and so forth, which is another form of de-risking, if you will.
Mm,
Let us manage these projects. So there are always going to be very many project managers in there, particularly when you're dealing with these projects that are very cross-functional, have a lot of moving parts, so on and so forth. So I've often recommended to people that if they want a safe career where there'll always be work, go into project management. Okay, there will always be work for competent project managers in there. But the technical angle is interesting because you would be aware yourself, Rad, that for many years there was never any formal qualification in a lot of this
mm,
stuff.
mm,
You happen to do a couple of math courses, you might have done a programming course, and then a lot of everything was just became very homegrown. Okay,
mm,
you grew into that expert, and now, of course, we're seeing university courses, a lot of these things where people are specializing in them, and
yeah.
they're churning out very competent individuals in there.
Mm,
Some of them are scarily good at what they do, and put myself to shame and so forth. But I think sometimes also with a little bit of a loss of the breadth of knowledge in there, where once upon a time, because you had to educate yourself in these things, you would know more about the context of what you were working on. I mean, I myself was
mm,
an immunologist.
mm,
Uh, and so I still bear with that sort of biological knowledge that's going to help me do my work better. But
mhm.
experts will get now certainly be much better at wielding these technical approaches, but with less of the mile high view of what
Yeah,
they're doing.
yeah, I totally agree. So what you're saying is like new generations of um, this workforce is very specialized in the things that they're doing, but they maybe lack business awareness about what they really do, or is that correct?
I think perhaps lacking business awareness, which
Mm.
sounds like
Domain. Mm.
yeah, the domain knowledge,
Mm.
absolutely. And
Mm.
I think it is a wider problem often
Mm.
within these large companies that, if you look up business textbooks and things like that, you'll find
Mm.
lots of people talking about the importance of aligning with mission and
True.
understand why you're doing it, things like that. And in
Mhm.
such a complex enterprise, it's very easy to get lost in there and,
Yeah.
just concentrate on cranking your widgets out, your own little niche. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a difficult problem, and it's just being made a little bit more difficult by that increased technical focus.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. So now, Paul, I mean, um, we talked about leadership. We talked about large scale adoption of technologies. We talked about how smaller structures or companies, they take probably more risk than bigger ones. And I've seen a lot of these small companies feeding um, their products to larger companies to adopt within the organization. So in that space, you have vendors who are really trying to sell as much as possible their products and new technology. So and everything is crystal clear from impact perspective and how is that going to be useful. And then you have leadership who is aware of what's happening outside their organization, and they are willing to adopt these technologies within their big structures. But then life science in general is heavily regulated field.
Mm,
So there is that sort of the last things, the last hurdle to go through in terms of compliance and regulation. So do you see that affecting, if you take life science as a whole in comparing it to other domains like finance and marketing, do you see that uh, needs to evolve from life science perspective in order to accelerate innovation, or do you see it I mean uh, getting more and more complicated with new technologies happening outside their their field of expertise, and then that's gonna probably scare them more and try to they will probably tighten more that process of accepting new things within their organizations. How is compliance regulation, um, I would say, role in the entire story here?
okay. So we are in a regulated industry.
Mhm.
Okay. So regulation, drug approvals, is the needle that must be threaded for the development of any new therapy in there.
Mhm.
And it's a tough environment. And let's not look upon the regulatory agencies as
Yeah,
the villains in this piece.
yeah.
They serve a very important, very vital part in the development of new therapies, ensuring that the burden of evidence is delivered, and ensuring that drugs are adequately safe for
Yeah.
giving to people, so forth. What I think is possibly different about the life sciences industry is we tend to think about regulation very late in the process, in that we can go through a very long procedure in
Mm,
there. And then we get to the point of saying, okay, now we need this drug approved, and then regulation is going to come in. That is a simplification, but it comes in very late in the process. And
mm,
something that we've been able to work with, but perhaps we should really get regulatory people involved a lot earlier,
mm,
particularly if we're dealing with very sticky areas of, say, IP. Like if you're
mm.
starting to use generative AI, I think there's a minefield in there if you were to develop
Definitely.
something,
Yeah.
possibly uses someone else's material in there.
Mm,
So one would have to be very careful. And there is also a very complex area surrounding, if you're going to start using devices as well. So drugs, in some sense, now are more moving towards companies are not just going to be releasing a drug, they're almost going to be releasing a drug ecosystem, if
yeah.
you are. What's the
Yeah.
diagnostic to determine that you have the right condition that this drug can be tested with? And maybe there's a device to deliver the drug, and something to monitor you, and maybe the wearable device, and maybe even there's some device with an AI model in it, and so forth.
Mm,
The regulatory agencies have been very open and very obliging with those things, but it is a very complex area. You
yeah.
know, uh, how can we ensure that these things are going to work as well as they can without over-regulating them and perhaps strangling innovation in there?
Mm,
What sort of checks and balances do we need, and how do we make these devices, usable by people?
right.
Real people, without making it too difficult. So it's a complex area, and I think a lot of thought and a lot of development is going to have to be done in regulation to make it work better.
Hmm, interesting. Interesting. You mentioned people in the entire, so in the life in the life cycle of the entire process here. AI is being heavily now invested in and implemented in large scale organizations. At the end of the entire pipeline, there are the people and the patient. Is AI, machine learning, new technologies, do they impact somehow the end? I wouldn't really describe it as the end because they are in the at the source of everything. Or the patient, consenting on clinical trials, giving samples, and being subject to, um, you know, um, being the source of, all this innovation, making this all happen. Um, uh, how what is the place of the end user participant in the entire life cycle? Is Are they going to be affected somehow, in a positive way or in a negative way, with everything that is happening, the disruption of technology in the field of drug development?
Possibly.
Mm,
So I think very much now there has been this historical trend to what I think is the conveyor belt model of drug
mm,
development. We put a bunch of drug candidates on one end of the conveyor belt, and some of them are slowly sifted off, and they move along the conveyor belt till they get to approval, and then they move along the conveyor belt till they get to the patients. And not a lot goes back in the other
mm,
direction, where there is not a lot of long-term complex relationships between pharma companies and patients in there, as a general rule.
yeah.
But if you're talking about more personalized therapies, you cannot but help to have a very close relationship with the patient. What exactly has the patient got? If we're
Mm,
talking about a personalized cancer vaccine, for example, you have to somehow have appropriate diagnostics and so forth delivered at the point of care. They have to move back to the point of manufacture where they'll be analyzed appropriately, and that vaccine will be manufactured and then shipped out to the patient again. Is
mm,
bringing those two ends of the process a lot closer together in a
mhm,
way don't think happens very often. And
mm,
if we're talking about smart devices in some
mm,
sense, that might say you might have a device, an implant that monitors your blood glucose and dispenses insulin in an appropriate amount. You know, how are we going to appropriately prepare and sort of deliver that device to patients? And how do we cope with a whole support chain, if you will?
mm,
What happens if we get a bit of model drift and something like that, or it stops working with the patient? How do we deliver maintenance to it and so forth?
mm,
So once again, I think it's going from delivering a product to delivering a solution, and in business terms those are actually quite different.
mm. Interesting. So, I mean, you mentioned a lot of nice examples here that trigger a lot of questions again. So we can talk about these issues over and over. So I guess the one important thing to mention here, it's not a question. It's just I'm trying to think about data ownership. So, um, patients are the source of data, and data is being used in modeling, for put in place new sort of applications within
Mhm.
drug development industry, and then the data flows into processes, and then you have various ownership, delegations, and it gets more complicated when we get into the data governance of the within the organization.
Mhm.
Data ownership get lost in the entire thing. So the data belongs to who at the end of the day? So that's my question.
Oh, okay. I wish I had a good answer to that, because data governance is difficult.
Mm,
Uh, Now, we have people's sensitive data. So,
mm,
so we need to handle it in an appropriate way. And there is a case to be made for the patient's ownership of their data. in there. So, various people have talked about solutions for patients owning their data, if you will, and consenting explicitly to it being allowed to be used for various purposes.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that that also brings in certain difficulties.
Mm.
If I want to do some research, how complex is it going to be to get those data sets out there? Want to explore things. Does every research project have to be a major effort to obtain that data? And doesn't that stifle innovation in
Yeah.
there? So I think there is definitely a balance in there.
Mm.
Now, there are good working models. I think you look at things like the UK Biobank and so
Mm.
forth. They've essentially, sorted out all the consenting and permissions and everything like that, and the responsible handling of data. And that has just been a gold mine for
Yeah.
research there.
True.
It is paid back for all the effort that was used to set it up many times over, and it's an inspiration to systems all over the world. So, if we can have these large efforts to provide data in an easily accessible form where all the details have been taken care of,
Mhm.
it's great. I think that's a bonus for science, and that's a bonus for the patients in question.
Correct. True. So, Paul, how do you see things moving on from that point? So, there's a lot of crazy things happening around in terms of AI, machine learning. So many great applications, sometimes scary as well. How do you see this trend affecting the field of drug development, pharma in general? How do you see the field evolving in the probably next 5 6 years?
Hmm. Okay. So there's a lot of hype and promise and everything like that. Uh, Perhaps only partially observed, and I can't count the number of times that people have said that large models are going to put someone out of work. They're going to put programmers out of work. They're going to put data scientists out of work. They're going to put chemists out of work, so on and so forth. And that is not going to happen, not in
Mm,
the near future. It's not going to happen not in the near future because of, I think there is an inherent limitation in AI, a
mm,
limitation as it currently stands. Uh, and it's not so much, in fact, a limitation as it's almost by definitional thing, is that AI as it currently stands can tell us all about things that we already know a decent amount about.
mhm.
So if you look at systems that will, say, predict chemical properties, or they'll predict the fates of patients and so forth, we need a good set of data to train these
Correct.
systems,
Yeah.
to construct them. I mean, that goes without saying. This is the way that we build AI.
Mm,
What happens to the countries, to the areas outside the known? And this is where we don't have great systems.
mm,
That if you look at a new region clinical space, if you look at patients for a different set of conditions, well, your pre-existing systems are not going to help you. Okay, they'll not be able to give you good feeds there. So
yeah.
I think us humans are still in the loop for a while yet. Um, what I think is going to happen, rather than AI replacing chemists, replacing programmers, replacing statisticians, so forth, is that there is a quote. I think it came from Exscientia's CEO, who said that instead, chemists who use AI, statisticians use AI, biologists who use AI are going to replace all the previous ones.
Oh,
And
nice.
there is, I think, it may not be apparent to a lot of people just how much things have shifted over the last couple of decades. It used to be that if you were working in the biology or medicine space, it was 80% talking to patients, taking samples, doing lab bench stuff, and 20% analytics. And we're now instead, that's flipped over where we're now in an 80% analytics space in there. So
Mm,
everyone is going to have to be at least a bit data savvy and use at least a few data and AI tools. There will just be no choice. You will be left behind.
that's very interesting. That is very interesting. Paul, thank you so very much for being with us today. So many good points in our discussions, and I hope to see you again in another episode with Unscripted. So, thank you for being with us. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Always a pleasure, Rad. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, Paul. Before we go, so Paul, where can people find you on the internet?
Okay. I do have a much neglected website, but these days I think you'll find me mostly on LinkedIn, where I'll occasionally post things about some interesting papers that I read, talks that I've given, and things of the sort. Why not connect up with me? And you'll occasionally get me to make stupid jokes about statisticians.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Rad.
Thank you.